Hello and welcome to 365 Days of Excelling with Clive. This is day 50 and today we are looking at defining names and name manager. So one would ask, what is a name? So basically what we usually do in Excel is we reference to a range. For example, here I'm just selecting range A1 to E18. We usually reference it as A1 is to A15. So this is how we usually reference to that range. So this range, we usually reference it this way. So this used range here. However, sometimes it becomes necessary, especially if you have a lot of ranges you want to work with, it becomes necessary for you to name a particular range, give it a name that will make sense in a formula. So if I open this formula, you can see the range which I have used here. But if I have a lot of worksheets I'm working with, and I have a lot of ranges I'm working with, then it becomes more difficult to understand a formula. So sometimes you might want to define a name so that instead of using this vague reference to a particular range, you can actually use a defined name. For example, if I define this as a list of students, I would actually use the name list of students or students list here instead of A1 is to A to E18. So where do you define a name? So if you want to define a name, you would come here under formulas, then here under define name, then you say define name. Then you can put a name here. So before you open that window, you would have to first select the range you want to define, and you say define name. Then you can say it already picks that in my first cell here there is student number, but I don't want to name this this whole array student number. I want to rather call it student list. It's quite key though to note that you have to give a name which doesn't have spaces in between. If you want to keep the spaces, one trick you can use is to use an underscore. So you just shift underscore. So you can use an underscore, or otherwise you just put a name without spaces. It will be acceptable. Because if I try to put spaces and I say okay, it will say I cannot use that name. So it will say rather try to use an underscore or something else. So I can just say, okay, I want it without an underscore. Once I define a name, you can see now that it's showing here as a defined name. So before you define a name, it will not show a name here. It will just show the cell from which my range is starting from. So let's just go one step back. I will just delete my name again. So to delete a name or to edit the name I have created, I just go to name manager. Then I can either delete or edit it. Let me just delete it for now. So you can see that if I don't have a name, it will just show as A1, which is the cell from which my range is starting from. Then also, what I can do also is this range I can name, even though I have named this whole range. You see, if I select the whole range, it gives me the name of this whole range, which is student list. And I can, within this named range, I can also name another range, and I can call it, maybe this one I'm going to call it student number. So I'm happy with the student number here. So I just say, okay. Then if I want to go to my named range, I just click Ctrl and G. Then I say go to, so you can see there my named ranges are appearing here. Then if I just select student list and say okay, it goes to my student list. And if I say click Ctrl G again, and go to student number, it's going to select only the student number here. Then it goes to student number. So it becomes much more easier to navigate between your named ranges. So even if they are on different sheets, you can still use Ctrl G and select the named range you want to visit, and you just say OK, and you can visit that named range. The next thing that I'm going to tackle is, where does it become beneficial to have a named range, especially in calculations? So if you remember, in day 10, we covered the filter formula, which I'm showing here. So with this filter formula, you can see here I was filtering using the range. I'm filtering range A1 to A18. But then it gets a bit vague for someone who is reading my formula if they don't really understand Excel that much. So I would want to make it much more easier and much more readable for non-extensive Excel users. So what I would do, instead of referencing to a range like this way, I can now use my named range to just reference to the range which I want to select. So I want to select the student list. So instead of using this, I say student list. You can see they pop up here. So my array is student list. Then also here, what I'm filtering is this A1 to A18. But instead of using A1 to A18, I can actually use, because I'm filtering for student number, so I can say student number instead. So I used again my named range here. Then I say OK. So it still works perfectly fine as if I'm using reference to an array. So this is where you can use your named ranges, and this is a perfect use for it, and it becomes much more beneficial because someone reading it can actually say, okay, you are filtering the array student list, and they can also even go to student list and just say Ctrl G and go to student list, and they can say you are filtering by student number, where student number is equals to G1, which is this one. So that's it, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.